Absolutely. Us, yeah. Hi,
Oh
Brian.
yeah, hi.
How
Yeah,
are you?
yeah. Hi, Brian.
Right. Sorry, my microphone was muted. Hopefully, hi. Can somebody confirm that you can hear us? There's always these slight issues at the beginning. Can you hear me? Can you hear Brian and Stefan? Can you just say hi again, please?
Hello. Hi,
Yeah.
guys.
Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody.
Is that coming through loud and clear? Sorry, my microphone was muted. Hopefully, hi. Can somebody confirm that you can hear us? There's always these slight issues. I'm just checking myself. Can you hear me? Can you hear Brian and Stefan? Can you just say hi again, please?
Hello. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Yeah, I think we're good. I just have to remember. I just have to remember to mute myself when you guys are talking, but I'm getting used to doing that. Right. So, hello everyone. I'm Brian Waters from the QTube, as you probably know by now. But hopefully we've got some new people as well. So I run the QTube, and I'm really delighted to be joined by Brian and Stefan from Leeds Conservatoire, and I'm gonna. Rather than risk messing up the introductions, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. So we're delighted to have a really good relationship with Leeds Conservatoire. And yeah, so Brian, perhaps I could start with you.
Yeah, sure. My name's Brian. I basically wrote the film music degree at Leeds Conservatoire, and I ran it for about 6 years, and then I became deputy head of the department that runs it. But I also still teach film music. Before that, I spent years in the industry working, and I still do bits of work now, but for about 30 years before I did that, I was working in the industry. And yeah, we've got a relationship going with QTube now, where we have a kind of license going where our students, there's about 80 film music students, can actually get open access to all of Brian's resources. And that's how essentially we met him, really. And Brian's been to the other Brian, by the way, has been to the college a few times and spoken to the students. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah, we've been delighted to come along. We've met a good number of students, and I've been with Jack from NFO as well. So yeah, it's been really nice to get to know more about what's going on at Leeds Conservatoire. Stefan, over to you.
Hi, yeah. I'm Stefan Gordon. I also obviously work at Leeds Conservatoire. I've worked with Brian. I've known Brian for many years now. I think we first met in the music production course.
Absolutely.
Back when we first started, and then Brian decided, it's always had this sort of vision for actually developing a film music degree. And so yeah, that was my background. Is I started I was a guitarist and songwriter in a indie guitar band back in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, and I did all that kind of stuff with a record deal, publishing deal, all that kind of stuff. But I was always really into film and filmmaking was something that I was particularly into, and I from that, once the sort of band thing sort of came sort of ran its course, and I had a very minor hit single for the back of a mobile phone commercial, and when we went on tour, I I basically, as a US tour, I filmed it. I did a lot of filming for it, and our record company decided that. So I showed them the footage, and they said, if you can get it down to 5 minutes, we're going to use it. And so that was my my entry into the world of filmmaking. To cut a long story short, I then went into. I thought I really wanted to be a filmmaker, so I went to film school, and I graduated from film school as a director. And then when I worked got the job at Leeds, what was then Leeds College of Music, I sort of covered both areas of obviously looking at music production, which is where I met Brian, but we're also concentrating on films. So what I do is I teach our our film music students about film language and the art of cinema. So that's how I sort of fit into that. So looking at it from a director's perspective and what a director expects, sort of really is looking for from a film music soundtrack.
Fantastic. That's really great. Thank you both. I'm really delighted. Thank you for your time this evening. So to let everybody know that this is an introduction really to Kickstart, what's going to be a fairly regular thing where hopefully both of you are going to be able to come on once a month, and we're going to set something up whereby we review work by the QTube community every month. And it's going to be done on a sort of randomized basis, as we have done a little bit in the past, but to have you two guys doing it is going to bring a little bit of extra weight really to the sort of value of that kind of feedback. So I'm really excited about launching that. We're going to start that next Friday, right?
Yeah, no, that's we're looking forward to it.
That's superb. And I mean, this is the type of thing that you do all the time with your students, yeah? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm looking forward to it. And one of the reasons I, signed up for this was, I think out of the whole things I do in my job, the bit I enjoy most, apart from teaching film music with Stefan, is actually listening to students work. It's just great. There's just no substitute for just getting 20 students in a room and them all coming to the front with a memory stick with all their work on, and you just sit there and you listen to it and you talk about it basically. And it's just a really, really absorbing, interesting thing to do, and hopefully beneficial for the students, but also beneficial for us. I mean, I get tons out of it. Tons of satisfaction. I think Steph does as well.
Yeah. I think because Brian and I do these sessions on a Tuesday afternoon, and we sort of mix it up with us delivering sort of lectures on seminars on film music. But then we have where students bring their work and show it, and we give feedback, and it's great. And I think sort of watching sort of new up and coming film composers, their skills, watching their sort of developing skills, it's great. I think we get a lot from it.
Yeah. And you also do a regular thing that you call film night, yeah? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I set film night up about. Actually, I was thinking the other day, Stefan, the film course has been running for 7 years now, but film night predates that. Film night has been running for about 15 years, which I didn't realize it's that long. And what it is, we get a big room, we get a big kind of gig room with a massive screen. And we could choose like 10 or 15 students out of the people that have submitted to basically play their films and film music live. And we invite a couple of specialists up. So a couple of weeks ago, we had a guy called Nicholas Dodd, who was the orchestrator of all the Bond films, for example, in the late 90s for David Arnold. And he's done absolutely stacks of work as an orchestrator. And he was sat on the panel, and normally it's a guest plus Stefan. And they basically just feed back on the students' work. And occasionally on the back of that, students will get work out of it. If we have a guest that comes who listens to some work and really, really likes it, then I'll get a phone call the following day saying, any chance we could have that student's details or whatever. So I mean, that happens sometimes. Yeah.
To me, it's about film night. Just to add, I think it's some of the best teaching that can happen actually in many ways, because the students see it on a big screen, and that's one thing, but they see it in front of their peers. So and they can see when there's an audience, it's more obvious about what works and what doesn't work. So it's not just necessarily about the feedback we give them, which is obviously a big part of it, but it's also how they sort of see it in a room full of people as well. And I think that makes a real big difference. So I think, to me, that the film night stuff is one of the really big parts of the sort of teaching strategy that's in place that we have, and that sort of Brian set up originally. I think we did it in the music production days, didn't we, Brian?
We did. And I mean, when you look back to those days, when I set it up, I never knew we'd be doing it 15 years later. And I also never realized how pivotal it become. I mean, we get students coming on the degree who say that one of the main reasons they're there is for that. And I never envisaged that. To me, it was just a gig. And now we do them between 5 and 6 times a year. You know, I mean, the very first time we ran it, I can remember giving a lift home in the car to the guy that co-hosted it with me and just saying, I think we got away with that, you know, because it was so kind of like, you know, but now that, I mean, now they're quite slick affairs and they've become quite an important thing. So, yeah.
Can you, I mean, just because people like this sort of thing, can you mention some of the other guests that you've had on some of those films?
I will mention some, and I'm sure the ones that I miss out, Stefan will help me. We got a guy called Harry Escott. He's just recently won a BAFTA award. He's done loads of TV work. If you Google him, he's done shed loads of TV work. We got Jocelyn Pook, who worked famously on Eyes Wide Shut with Stanley Kubrick, and she worked more recently on a fictionalized thing about King Charles. Before the Queen had actually died, they did a fictionalized version of Succession. Great composer, and she came up. Who else we got? We've got Steph, who's the guy that
was Ben Bartlett as well.
I always forget this guy's name, and it's terrible. I don't know why. Ben Bartlett, he did Walking with Dinosaurs and tons of other stuff. And normally the way it works is, the way I meet these people is that I write books on film music, and these books are free. I mean, they don't cost anything. And what normally happens is either these people see the books, read them, and then call me, or I call them to get a quote or to get an interview. And then when they find out that we got a film music course, they just can't resist it. They just want to come up and have a fish around and see what's going on, you know. Steph, can you think of, I mean, I already mentioned three.
David Julian as well.
Oh, David Julian, he worked with the director that did Insomnia. Christopher Nolan. He did Christopher Nolan's early films before Hans Zimmer took over. Sorry, Steph, carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah, he's been a couple of times, hasn't he? Actually.
Yeah.
Who was the guy? The guy that did the EastEnders.
Simon May. We had Simon May a few years ago.
Yeah,
that was hilarious. The guy that did loads of TV, and amongst other things, he famously wrote the EastEnders theme tune. I mean, we normally have, I'd say, 5 or 6 a year, but we have a lot online. We have a lot from America. So we have Zoom versions of these. And
Laura Rossi's the other one.
Yeah, Laura Rossi comes. We've currently got about 8 or 9 of our ex-students that are working out in LA, working for various people. A couple of them are working for Hans Zimmer at the moment. One of them is the assistant to John Powell. So what we do is we get those to come and do Zoom sessions from LA, and they just tell us what it's like over there, and it's quite interesting, because you've got guys here who are like 23, 24 out in LA, essentially kind of living the dream, really. And so it's good. I think they're more valuable in many respects than even the more established composers, because students can think like, you know, this could be me in like 5 years or whatever.
They can relate to it.
Yeah. So we do about 7 or 8 Zooms a year, and we do about 5 or 6 live ones in the building.
That's brilliant. That sounds fantastic. And so, like, how do you find the students respond to that feedback? Like, how receptive are they, and sort of, do you then notice that it really informs their work from that point forward, or is it a very mixed picture?
I think it does inform their work. I mean, quite often they'll come to me and say, "Oh, well, Nicholas Dodd said I ought to have done this," and I'm thinking, well, actually, I said that to you about 8 weeks ago, but never mind. So sometimes it's good to get that validation from a Hollywood orchestrator or whatever. But yeah, I think it does help them. It's a film night helps them a lot more than I ever thought it would. I got to be honest.
Yeah.
For me, it was just a gig, and seeing the way it's developed is a surprise to me. But yeah, in answer to your question, I think it does benefit them, and they become better writers, because me and Steph spend virtually all of our work, working hours explaining to them, I mean, the kind of things you have to consider when you're writing film music. Not necessarily how to write film music, like put this chord here, put that chord there, but the pitfalls and the things to avoid. And a lot of these things the students haven't thought of. A lot of them are very simple observations,
Yeah, and I think it goes back to a little bit to what I was saying earlier. I think sometimes, yeah, the feedback obviously informs them, but I think they can see quite a lot themselves when
Yeah.
because they can see when it's on a bigger screen with loud, bigger speakers, that they can spot the mistakes that they may have made themselves as well. What's also interesting is, and you're always bound to get this, is that different viewpoints. So, I might say something, and the guest we've got would say something completely different, and then they come, and I always think, oh, it's going to be interesting the next meeting we have, because they're going to say, yeah, you were wrong. Do you know what I mean? And actually, a couple of times I've had this where they've sort of said, actually, I didn't really agree with the guest, which I was surprised at, and gone with what I've said, So, but it's not like a competition or anything. It's just they pull in what they want to pull in, and I always say to them, look, this is what feedback's all about. It's all good, and any kind of criticism's good. If it gets too confusing at some, you've got to shut that down and make up your own mind up as well.
Yeah.
But
I mean, a lot of students, some students, when they're fresh to the business and fresh to film, if you say to them, look, I think this one hasn't quite, there's a few things you need to tighten up. Occasionally, when they're new to it, they'll say, well, film, I mean, music is subjective. And of course, music is subjective. Film music is a lot less subjective, because at the end of the day, film music either works or it doesn't. Yeah. And if I were to ask you, Brian, if I played you, 3 tracks our students had written, and I said, does this work? And I asked it to Stefan and me, the chances are we're going to agree on that basic thing, right? So in that respect, it's not subjective at all. It is a very simple thing. It either works or it doesn't. And so, it is interesting getting into those arguments and getting into those little nuances about what kind of things make film music work.
And do you think,
that's our job, basically.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that a way that you would essentially summarize the purpose of the course, is really to get that across?
Yeah, I mean, I think the purpose of the course is, of course, to teach people how to write music, and they have one-to-one sessions for that. But my classes in harmony, orchestration and stuff, and emotion are not principally only about that. They're about, why do we have music in the first place? If you can thoroughly get your head around why we need music for film, then you can be a great film composer. But if you don't actually fundamentally understand that concept, then you could spend all your life writing brilliant music and never get anywhere, because it doesn't actually work as great film music, because there's a difference between great music and great film music. So that's my job most of the time, is just saying, when you guys write music, I mean, if you think about this, right, and then I'll pass over to Steph, but when you think about this, when you write music, it's only ever really music when you write it, right? You take it to the orchestra or whatever, and they record it, or you put it on your door and you record it. When people in the audience listen to it, they're not sat there going, oh, that's an F minor 7, that's a G minor 7. They are distilling it as emotion. So when you're writing music, the last thing you should be doing is trying to impress people musically, because it's utterly irrelevant. What you should be doing is thinking, what kind of emotion are people going to get from this? And that is the center of everything. That is the kind of epicenter of absolutely everything I do, is trying to get them to understand how to create emotion in film through music, and also when not to write, when to just stop, when to say, let's have some silence here. Sorry, Steph, I think I was talking
great.
over you. Sorry.
No, that was really good. So, I mean, just to add to that, I think my part is that we look at, I mean, I go into looking at film directing, what it is to be a director, a filmmaker. We look at film language, film theory, all that kind of stuff. But I think what, and to add from what Brian's already said, is that I brought in what my experience, which was obviously I started off in music, and then when I knew I always loved film. So I think always often ask myself, what is it about film that I love so much? And it's because it's so multi-layered. So there's so many different elements to it. So you've got the script, which means the story, and you've got the acting, and you've got the directing, you've got the editing. So it's so multi-layered. And for me, what film music is part of that process. So it fits in with everything else. So in other words, to me, what I sort of always say to our students is that they're filmmakers. They are filmmakers. They're yes, they specialize in music composition, but they have to see themselves as filmmakers, the same as a cinematographer would, because they're there to tell the story. They're there to create the tone. They're there to enhance what the film is about. So, and that's, to me, is the real beauty of film, because it and what directing's about is to it transports the audience from their own reality into a different world, and part of that process is obviously the music, but it fits in with everything else. So if the cinematographer has lit a scene in a certain way, then the music's got to fit with that. And it's what Brian said, it's about emotion. So the lighting creates an emotion and creates a tone, and the music does that. And editing, to me, I think to be a great film composer is to have a real understanding of editing as well. And that's a lot to do with pacing, tone, rhythm, all that stuff.
They all work so hand in hand, don't they? I mean, this is what I'm increasingly learning, because I mean, running the QTube is a fantastic school for me, and I'm learning more about this process. And, the importance of the editor is something that's really come to light since we've started doing our own films, and it's incredibly important.
Well, and also it's a big thing for a composer, because what usually happens is that it's obviously the post-production strand of it. So chances are the director's gone off and doing something else, and so they'll be working with the editor. So I think you've got the composer and you've got the editor working in that phase, and then obviously the director will come in at the end and go, well, yes or no at that point. So
it's so true, all this. I mean, I've spoken to quite a few, loads of composers over the years, and virtually everyone has echoed what Steph just said at some point. I can remember one of the first conversations that I had years and years and years ago was with Jerry Goldsmith, a famous film composer, and he said, when he worked on Alien, that the most conversations he had was with Terry Rawlings, who was the editor on Alien, and Terry Rawlings attempted with the temp music, and so his relationship wasn't really with Ridley Scott; it was with Terry Rawlings and stuff. And they always come back to that. The editor is absolutely key, because the editor knows more than anybody else about the rhythm of the film.
Yeah, and they will say, because every director works in a different way, of course, but they might hand it over to the editor, and then the editor's assembling it and even been doing a first cut, and they might actually, even with the director not being there, say to the composer, there's a lot of space in this scene here, this is where we're going to need something, and they'll look at it and then obviously it's going to have to be approved by the director at some point. But it's very much, I think, and this is why editors make great directors, actually, because they know when they're assembling it what's lacking in the film. And I think that's where a composer needs to have those filmmaking skills to sort of say, as Brian mentioned this earlier, about knowing when to take a step back and when to take a step forward, because you can, and one of the common faults, for obvious reasons, when students start out, is overscoring, because they want to show off their skills, and that makes a lot of sense. But this is where your filmmaking skills kick in, because you'll go, well, actually, we need to allow space here and punctuation. But you work with the editor on that as well.
I mean, it's funny what Steph says, because I've had many a conversation with students, and they've said, I came here to write music, and you're just telling me to not write music all the time. And I'm saying, well, I'm not telling you to not write. I'm telling you to write less, because you're overcooking it. and you're making drama into melodrama, and you're just making the whole thing a bit cheap. And it's great music, but it's just as too much of it. And and that's the biggest battle I think I have, is trying to convince them to write less. There's a piece of music that I play on open days. Well, there's plenty, but there's one particular piece written by a student who rescored Broadchurch, and she did this absolutely cracking music, and it got a really high grade. And then she came to see me and said, "I don't understand why I've got a high grade, because it was musically, it was just a bit dull." I said, we're not grading your music as music. We're grading it, does it work with the film? And it worked brilliantly well. And all there were like 7 or 8 chords, because sometimes that's all you need, especially on TV drama and film drama that we cover an awful lot. It is about nuance and about emotion and about, like Steph says, pulling back when you need to, and not just trying to impress.
I think that's an incredibly difficult thing for people to get their head around. And I think that, as you say, there are so many parallels with editing. I mean, one of the things that we realized, even with our little film Activities of Daily Living, was that you could spend, half a day shooting a scene, and then you get to the editing suite and you decide it just doesn't work and you've got to bin it.
Yeah. I mean, I remember going to some, before, I think, probably the early days of first working with Brian. Actually, I've been to some of his classes, and I remember him talking about architecture and sort of sculpting music around. And then this is the thing, is about the shape of it. And I was listening to on the train earlier I was coming back to London today, and listening to an interview with Mark Cousins, who I'm a big fan of, and he was talking about film music, and he was saying about in the early days, if you look at film history, the early days, it was like music was, and this was his words, music was slammed on the film. And I think that's the thing, is that quite often you can make that mistake of just slamming music up. And you were saying it was when they discovered about film composition. And he said this other great line about, finding the engine of the film. So in other words, what's at the heart of the film, what makes the film work. Once everybody knows what that is, whoever's working on it, then you've got the film. So that as I say, goes for the cinematography, it goes for the production design.
I mean, another classic kind of thing that people have to, kind of try to get away from doing, is a lot of them just put the film on and they sit at a keyboard and they go, right, let's write some film music. And often that's not the good way, because all you're doing is improvising. And I always say to students, and I liken it to my own career, if I had a week to do a documentary or whatever, I would spend a day watching it, a day talking to people, and then the actual time writing music was only about half a day in that whole week. And if you spend time looking at the film, reading the film, looking where the pinch points are, you decide what textures you're going to have, you decide what kind of harmony you want to go for. Is it going to be dissonant harmony? Is it going to be regular pop harmony, or whatever? And if you've done all those jobs really well, when you come to write it, it's actually quite easy. Writing music for film is only hard if you're just literally reacting on the spot, because that's just a tall order, coming up with stuff in that way. Whereas if you do your research, it sounds boring, but if you do your research about the film and the clips and where the director wants the music and what kind of textures, what sonic world is this music going to live in? If you do all those jobs, when you finally come to write it, you'll be amazed how quick it all falls into place.
Absolutely fantastic insight. And I mean, this is the type of thing that people can look forward to really with our feedback sessions. And
Absolutely.
Certainly a lot of the points that you're raising, they definitely resonate with what we've noticed when people are rescoring clips from our library, or when we did our composer kind of auditioning process for Activities of Daily Living. I mean, great music, more or less across the board. But the difference is that nuance. And we did a feedback session recently live with Carlos Rafael Rivera, who did the Queen's Gambit, and he was doing feedback on our trailer for our forthcoming documentary. And it was really interesting for me because he didn't do any prep. And he said, okay, like this was on the live stream. He said, right, the first thing I want to do is just watch the documentary, the trailer with no music. I just want to watch it and see what you've got. And then he spoke for a good 10 or 15 minutes about his observations on the trailer before hearing any of the submissions by the composers. And that laid a really good foundation for the feedback session, I thought. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's great. It's like, and I often say to our students, as well, even before the filming stage, read the script. If you can read the script and get into, going back to what I was saying before, get to the heart of the film.
Yeah. I mean, one of the first things I would do in a one-to-one, if a student said I want it, because at the college we've got like hundreds of clips, everything ranging from films to TV. What we hadn't got until Brian came along was any animation at all. And obviously Brian's stuff has brought a whole new dimension. But let's say it's something that Brian's done, then we'll watch the film and we'll just sit there deflated thinking, wow, this needs music so badly. That's not to say the film isn't good. I'm just saying the film needs music. And when students actually hear it without music, it can be quite a traumatic experience, because they're like, Christ, what can I do to this? And that's what the art of film composing is. It's not just writing music. It's about placement, like Steph said, about architecture, about reading the film. Where does it need it? Where is the bit where there's an expression between two people? And if you didn't have the music, you'd be none wiser. There, we need the music. We need something in there to just lift it. Not something that's going to go like a bull in a china shop, but something that's just lives behind it, just like a whisper. And it's those kind of things, And if you've ever watched a 4-minute clip of Doctor Who or Sherlock or Broadchurch without music, let me tell you, they are pretty dead experiences, aren't they, Steph? I mean, they're well made, but blimey, how much you need music.
Yeah. No, actually, but it's interesting as well, because for directors, and obviously, because I sort of studied this at film school as well, but for a director, that they are so into what they do in terms of crafting the film, obviously, but crafting individual scenes. And Broadchurch is a great example, actually, because whenever I watch a Broadchurch clip, and students have access to quite a few of them, is that the acting is superb. And so it's like, you've got to be so careful, because the director will be very proud of the performance that's come alive from that scene that they've worked with the actor on. So if you then give that to a composer and say, well, needs music, well, you've got to tread carefully, because that, especially not just the acting, but the way it's been shot. So Broadchurch is another great example, because a lot of it's in close-up. So when you're using a close-up, what kind of music are you going to use for a close-up? These are all big decisions, and they're directorial decisions for a composer.
I've spoken to a composer called James Newton Howard quite a few times, and one of the times he was talking about his relationship with Night Shyamalan, who he scored most of Night's films. And he was saying that Night's idea is he makes a film which he thinks will work without music, always, every time. He makes a film and he goes, right, I'm going to make it as best I can without music. And he always says to James, I don't think we'll need it this time. And then James goes away, and then Night always goes, oh, you were right. It's just beautiful. And it's just interesting that those kind of relationships are still happening at that level, where the director says, this will work. And the composer just goes, try this, And it's just really, really interesting, I think.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. So, we're going to start these feedback sessions next week. And what I would emphasize to anybody that's watching and looking forward to these feedback sessions, which everybody should be looking forward to, is try and join us live if you can. The feedback sessions will stay on the channel for people to watch retrospectively. And I know that time zones can make it difficult. But if you can join us live, it will give you an opportunity to be involved and and use the live chat and perhaps fire questions to Brian and Stefan and all that kind of thing. So we'll be announcing more details of the next feedback session very soon, but basically we'll be reviewing some of the rescores of our FORTUNA documentary trailer, this documentary that we're making in Brazil. And just quickly on that subject, I want to mention that on Sunday we will have a live stream with the producer and co-producer and director of the documentary. That's Will Machetta and Max Bartholomew. And the main purpose of that live stream is in response to something that came up in the chat on our previous live stream, which was that people were very interested in knowing more about the technical aspects of making this documentary, like what cameras are we going to use, what lenses, what are the logistics of shooting something in Brazil, and all that kind of stuff. So I'm really looking forward to that on Sunday, and I hope that people will join us. But I think our first session with you guys is going to be next Friday at the same time. Yes, is that what we're aiming for?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to it. Looking forward to listening to not just the advert, but all the other films that you've got in Q2, because I've seen them so many times. And is it
the trailer that we're going to be feeding back on next week?
Next week I'd like to focus on the trailer, if that's okay with you guys.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Okay, great. And I mean, just to let everybody know, including yourselves, for your own interest, but also for your students, we are in the process at the moment of putting another half dozen clips together for our library. So very exciting times. And we're working on some genres that we currently don't have in the library. So that's really exciting. So
that's brilliant. That's fantastic. Yeah.
I can't wait to share that. But I do think that this documentary that we're shooting in Brazil is going to be an absolutely superb resource. So yeah, I hope that people really get behind our Kickstarter. Don't forget our Kickstarter. Yeah. And we're looking forward to starting shooting it actually next month. So time is racing.
So are you involved in the actual? So you're producing it, Brian, or are you directing some of it as well, or are you?
No, I'm not yet at the stage where I can direct anything, but we're coming on board as co-producers of the project. Yeah, so it's really tremendous. And again, it's a bit of a genre that is underrepresented in our library, so that will be great. But of course, it's an exclusive really for us as well, which is always superb to have. So.
I must admit, trying to get hold of documentaries when we were looking for clips when I first set the course up, and we get new clips every year, but documentaries were always the difficult ones. And it's a real shame because I love documentaries and I've written tons of them over the years. And I do a couple of lectures and Stefan talks about it, but the actual, in terms of clips, we didn't really have much. But a lot of the students just get out there and they meet new directors. I mean, that's the idea. The idea is that they're not dependent on our resources. They just get out there and meet directors and start scoring real films,
Absolutely. Well, we'll draw the evening to a close. Thank you so much. We've had a decent number of people watching, and I'm sure that the views will rack up over the weekend. But thank you, and have a great weekend. I look forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for setting this up. It's great.
I look forward
next week.
Cheers. Bye. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.